The morning of my mother's funeral, the family lawyer called me at 6 minutes after 7, before I had even put my coffee on, and the first words out of his mouth were not condolences. The first words out of his mouth were, "Ruth, I need you to sit down." I was already sitting. I was at my mother's kitchen table, in the cream clapboard farmhouse, on the 14 acres of rolling greenbrier pasture, where I had grown up, where she had died 11 days earlier, where the smell of her lavender hand cream still hung in the curtain at the kitchen window. I had slept in my old bedroom upstairs, with the door open so I could hear the house settling, the way she used to listen for it. I had not put my coffee on yet because I had not been able to bring myself to take her tin from the shelf. "I'm sitting, Mr. Caudill," I said. "What is it?" "Your aunt filed a probate motion in Lewisburg yesterday afternoon," he said very carefully. "Vivian. She has filed for primary inheritance based on a verbal promise claim. She is asking the court to hold the estate in her name pending a hearing." The line went quiet for a long moment. I could hear his pen tapping. I could hear my own pulse behind my left ear. Outside the kitchen window, the valley was the color of cold pewter, and the maples on the ridge had gone the color of rust, and a small wind was moving across the pasture in a way that made the long grass lean like a bowed head. "She filed yesterday," I said. "We bury my mother at 11. "Yes, Ruth," he said. "I know. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I sat at my mother's kitchen table in her empty house, and I looked at the wall above her stove, where she had hung a small wooden cross her own mother had carved in 1948. And I felt something inside my chest go very still and very level, the way water goes still and level when it freezes from the bottom up. "Don't say anything to her at the burial," Mr. Caudill said gently. "Don't give her a sentence she can quote. Just bury your mother. We'll meet on Monday." "All right," I said. "Ruth," he said, "I'm sorry. I have known your mother 41 years. I am sorry." "Thank you, Mr. Caudill." I hung up the phone, and I sat at the kitchen table for another 9 minutes by the wall clock, and I did not move. Then I stood up, and I took my mother's tin of coffee down from the shelf, and I made a pot the way she had taught me when I was 12, 4 scoops and a pinch of salt. And I drank 1 cup standing at the window, with my hand on the curtain where her lavender hand cream still lived in the cotton. And I went upstairs, and I dressed for her burial. The cemetery sits on a low rise above the Greenbrier River, 4 miles from the farmhouse, on a piece of pine and oak woodland the church bought in 1911. My mother had picked her plot in 1996, the month after my father died, and she had paid for it in cash from her egg money. She had told me about it on a long-ago Sunday afternoon, sitting on the porch step in the same place where, 3 weeks later, I would be sitting when Marguerite Doolin came up the gravel drive with the leather notebook in her hand. But on the morning of the burial, I did not know any of that yet. There were 38 people at the graveside. I counted them the way I count things when my hands are shaking. Pastor Renfro stood at the head of the open grave in his black wool overcoat. The pallbearers were 4 of the men who had farmed the valley alongside my father: Mr. Hartzell, Mr. Linkus, Mr. Wicker, and a younger man I did not know whose name I learned later was Caudill's nephew. They had set the casket down on the green canvas straps, and they had stepped back, and they had folded their hands. My Aunt Vivian stood at the far end of the open grave. She had driven up from Charleston that morning in a black Mercedes she had borrowed from a man she would not name, and she was wearing the dark charcoal pantsuit she always wore to funerals, the cream silk blouse with the small pearl pin at the collar, the knee-length charcoal pencil skirt, and the polished black low-heel pumps, and the single thin gold bangle on her right wrist that had been our grandmother's, and that my mother had once asked me, on a quiet evening, to forgive her sister for taking. Her ash blonde bob was sharp and neat. Her hard pale blue eyes were lined in dark eyeliner. She had her right hand at her own throat, as though she were the one being mourned. I did not look at her. I stood at the foot of the grave in my faded olive green canvas barn jacket, buttoned at the chest, my high-necked cream cotton blouse with the small pearl buttons buttoned all the way to the throat, my ankle-length dark blue jeans cuffed at the boots, my scuffed brown leather lace-up ankle boots, my mother's small silver locket on its thin silver chain at my throat. The wind came up the rise from the river and lifted the corner of the green canvas burial cloth and laid it down again. Pastor Renfro began the 23rd Psalm. I did not hear the words. I heard the wind in the pines, and I heard, very far away, the thin double note of a freight train moving up the valley toward Ronceverte. When Pastor Renfro had finished, and when Mr. Hartzell and Mr. Linkus had lowered the casket on the green canvas straps, and folded the straps and stepped away, I walked up to the head of the open grave, and I set my right hand flat on the casket lid. I kept my hand there for 30 seconds by the count in my own chest. The wood was the color of rust under the green canvas. My mother had picked oak because oak is what my father had picked. I did not say anything. I did not weep. I felt the grain of the oak under my palm, and I felt the cold of the morning coming up through the wood. And I said inside the back of my throat, where only she could hear me, the only sentence I had, I will not let her have it, Mama. I will not let her have 1 inch of it. Then I lifted my hand. I turned. I walked back to my truck across the wet grass, with my eyes on the gravel drive, and I did not look once at my Aunt Vivian. Not once, though I felt her watching me the way a hawk watches a field. I got into the truck, and I closed the door, and I sat with my hands on the wheel for 1 full minute before I started the engine. And I drove home to the farmhouse alone. I did not go to the church reception. I could not have stood it. Good. I made another pot of coffee. I took it out to the wraparound porch, and I sat on the second step from the top, where the sun warms the boards in the afternoon, and I watched the maples on the ridge until the light began to go down behind them. The valley turned the color of old brass. A barred owl called once from the pine woods east of the barn. I did not eat that night. I climbed the stairs in the dark, and I lay down in my old bedroom in my mother's house. And I did not sleep until almost 4 in the morning, and what I lay there thinking about was not Vivian and not the probate motion. What I lay there thinking about was a small thing my mother had said to me on the 3rd to last day of her life, when she was already past most words. She had taken my hand and she had laid it on her own chest, on top of the pale blue cotton hospital gown, and she had said, very quietly, "Ruth, when she comes for it, you remember that I left it in writing." And she had closed her eyes. I had not understood her at the time. I had thought it was the medication. I had stroked her wispy silver-gray hair where it lay on the white pillowcase, and I had said, "I know, Mama, because that is what you say." And then she had slept. Earlier that same night, on the 3rd to last day, my mother had opened her gentle pale blue eyes and looked at me very directly and said, "Ruth, is the porch swing chain still hanging from the hook in the barn?" "Yes, Mama. You take it down for the winter. You hang the swing on it again the first warm Saturday in April. You do that every year. You promise me." "I promise, Mama." "And the lavender at the spring house, You cut it back hard the second week in March. Don't be afraid of the shears." "I won't be afraid." She had closed her eyes for a minute. Then she had opened them again. "Ruth." "Yes, Mama. Your aunt is going to come to my funeral." I had said nothing. I had only held her hand. "She will come in a black car. She will wear our mother's bangle. She will cry where the people can see her. After they have lowered me, she will go into Lewisburg and she will start a fight." "Mama, you let her start it. You don't fight her at the burial. You let me have my burial first. After that, you fight her with what I have left you." "What have you left me, Mama?" She had smiled then, very small, the way she had smiled at me when I was 8 years old, and I had asked her where the egg money came from. "Something a great deal heavier than a bangle, child," she had said. "Now hush." I had hushed. I had not asked again. I had thought then that she meant the farm. I had not understood that she meant a leather notebook and 3 sealed letters, and a list of every dollar her sister had taken from her over 11 years. Lying in the dark above her empty kitchen on the night of her burial, I understood that she had not been dreaming. I just did not know yet, on that night, where the writing was. Mr. Caudill and I met on Monday morning in his small office above the hardware store on Main Street in Lewisburg. He laid the probate motion on his desk between us, and he turned it so I could read it. Vivian's claim ran to 7 pages. It said our grandmother had verbally promised the farm to Vivian in 1979. It said our mother had verbally confirmed that promise in 1994 at a family Christmas. It said our mother had repeatedly told Vivian over the past decade that the farm and the savings and the proceeds of the sale of the timber lot in 2017 were all to come to Vivian in trust for the church. There were no documents attached. There were 3 affidavits from people I had never heard of in Charleston, all of them claiming to have heard my aunt say what my mother had verbally promised her. "It is thin," said Mr. Caudill. "It is very thin, but it is filed, and until we move to dismiss it, the estate is frozen." "How long?" I said. "Could be 60 days. Could be 120. Depends on the docket and depends on what she files next." "What else can she file?" "She can file for emergency administration. She can ask the court to appoint her temporary executor pending the hearing. If she does that, she can sell the timber rights, she can lease the pasture, she can do almost anything short of conveying the deed." "Can she sell the house?" "Not without the court's permission, but she can apply for it, and if no contesting will surfaces, she has a fair shot at getting it." "How fair?" He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses for a long moment. He set the pen down. "Fair enough that I am not going to tell you it isn't," he said. "Your mother's intent will not stand on its own in a West Virginia probate court without paper. I have seen a verbal promise claim, like this one, carry the day twice in my career. Not often, but twice is too many for the side that has nothing in writing." I sat very still in the wooden client chair. "Mr. Caudill, I want to ask you something." "Go on." "Did my mother ever talk to you, in this office, in the last 6 months, about writing a new will?" He took his glasses off. He folded them. He set them on the desk between us. "Ruth, your mother came in here on the 8th of July of this year, and she sat in that chair where you are sitting now, and she said to me, 'Phineas, my sister is going to come for the farm when I am gone, and I do not have the strength left in this body to fight her in a lawyer's office. I am going to do it some other way. I am going to do it from my bed.'" Those were her words. I asked her what she meant by that. She said, "Don't you worry. I have figured a way. You just be ready when Ruth comes in." And she stood up and she shook my hand, and she walked out, and I did not see her again before she was admitted to the hospital. I sat in the wooden client chair across from him, with my hands folded in my lap, and I looked at the typed pages on his desk, and I felt the floor of my chest go level again, the way it had gone level at the kitchen table on Friday morning. "What do?" I said. "You go home," he said. "You go through every drawer in that house. You look in every shoebox and every cookie tin, and behind every framed photograph. Your mother was a careful woman. If she wanted you to have something, she will have written it down somewhere. Sealed wills, dictated letters, marginal notes in her Bible. Anything dated and signed and witnessed. You bring me anything you find. Do not throw away a single piece of paper." "All right. Ruth," he said. He took his glasses off and set them on the desk. "I have to tell you something. Your aunt has been calling on your mother every 6 weeks for the last 3 years. She has been borrowing money. Your mother told me about it last spring, in this office. Small amounts sometimes, 2,000 here, 5,000 there, once 9,000, always loans. None of them ever paid back. Your mother kept the records in a manila envelope she said she would give to you when the time came. I do not know where that envelope is. I want you to find it." "All right," I said. I went home that day with a list and a knot in my chest, and I started in on the house that afternoon. Vivienne called the farmhouse on the Wednesday evening of that first week. I was at the kitchen sink. I let the phone ring 4 times before I picked it up. I had told myself before I lifted the receiver that I would not raise my voice and I would not give her a sentence she could quote. "Ruth," she said, "it's Vivienne. I'd like to come up to the house this Saturday." "What for?" "To go through Mama's things together, the way sisters do." "You and I are not sisters, Vivienne. I am her daughter." There was a small silence. "Ruth, please. I know what you have heard about the filing. I want to explain. I never meant to file before the funeral. My lawyer pushed it through on his own timing. I would have stopped him if I'd known." "Did you sign the motion, Vivienne?" "Of course I signed it. He brought it to me to sign. But I didn't realize—" "Then you filed it." "Ruth, don't be cold." "I'm not being cold. I'm being clear. I just want to come up and sit with you. We can talk about Mama. We don't have to talk about the lawyer." "Vivienne, I am going to say this once. You are not coming up to this house this Saturday. You are not going through her things. You are not putting your hand on so much as a coffee cup in this kitchen until the court decides what is yours and what is not. If there is a thing of hers you would like, you write me a letter, and I will consider it." "You sound like your father when you talk like that." "Good." I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking. I went out onto the porch, and I stood for a long minute in the cold, and I waited for my hand to stop shaking. And when it had stopped, I went back inside, and I lit the lamp, and I went on going through papers. For the next 18 days, I went through the farmhouse, the way you walk a fence line after a storm. Every drawer, every shoebox, every rug, the attic, the cellar, the back of every wardrobe, the kitchen lap desk, her Bible, her cookbooks, her everyday correspondence, one piece at a time. I did not find the manila envelope. I did not find any sealed letters. I called Mr. Caudill on the Monday of the 3rd week. "Mr. Caudill, there is nothing in this house. I have been everywhere." "Where have you been?" "Attic, cellar, every drawer, every closet, every cookbook, the Bible, twice. The lap desk, twice. Behind framed photographs, twice." "Ruth?" "Yes. Your mother chose her hiding place on purpose. She would not have left it in a drawer. Think about where she put a thing she was telling you to find later, when you were a child. Think about what was the same about all of those places. They were always behind something else. That's right. Keep looking, Ruth. All right. By the start of the third week, I was beginning to be afraid. On the Tuesday afternoon of that third week, the second Tuesday in October, I had been at the kitchen table since after breakfast. I had a stack of papers in front of me, and I was sorting them into 3 piles: keep, throw, ask Mr. Caudle. The afternoon light was harsh through the window. My hands were tired. I had not eaten lunch. I heard a car come up the gravel drive at 20 minutes after 3, and I did not get up at first because I thought it was the propane delivery, and the propane man knew to leave the slip in the screen door. It was not the propane man. The car came up to the bottom of the porch steps and stopped, and a door closed, and there was a slow, careful tread on the gravel, and then a quiet knock at the screen door. I went to the door. There was a woman standing at the foot of the porch steps, not at the door, the way old country women still stand when they come to a house in mourning. She was 64 years old. She was 5 feet 4. She had a soft, full, upright build, and her silver gray hair was in a neat, low, practical chignon, and she had kind gray-blue eyes behind silver wire-rimmed glasses on a thin chain across her chest, and she had a weathered, ruddy complexion, and she had a small gold cross on a fine chain at her throat. She was wearing a soft, pale gray wool cardigan buttoned at the chest over a cream cotton blouse with small horn buttons buttoned to the throat, a knee-length charcoal pleated wool skirt, sheer nude tights, and plain brown leather low-heel shoes. In her right hand, she was holding a small, worn brown leather notebook. "Miss Whitcomb," she said, "my name is Marguerite Doolin. I was the night shift hospice nurse for your mother for the last 6 weeks of her life. I am sorry I did not come sooner. I owe you an apology, and I owe you something a great deal heavier than an apology." I knew her face from the hospital. I had seen her 3 or 4 times when I had come up at night to sit by my mother. We had nodded to each other in the hallway. I had not learned her name. "Miss Doolin," I said. I held the screen door open. "Will you come up onto the porch?" "Yes, ma'am, thank you." She came up the 4 wooden steps very carefully, and she stopped 1 step below the porch boards, and she looked up at me with the leather notebook in her hand. The afternoon light was coming over the ridge from camera right behind her in a long slant. "Your mother dictated 3 letters to me in her last fortnight," she said. "She dictated them to me at night. She had me write them out longhand in this notebook in her own words. And then she had me copy each one fair onto paper. And then she signed each one in front of 2 witnesses I brought from the night staff at the hospital. The letters are sealed. I have them in the car. The notebook is what we wrote them out of. The rough drafts in her own voice. I have brought you the notebook, and I have brought you the 3 sealed letters, and I have brought you the witness's contact information. Your mother named you sole beneficiary of her estate. She also disowned her sister Vivian explicitly, and she gave me an itemized list of every loan she had made to Vivian over the past 11 years, with dates and amounts. I did not say anything for a long moment. I was holding the screen door with my left hand, and I had my right hand gripping the door frame, and I felt the wood of the door frame against my palm, the way I had felt the oak of the casket lid 2.5 weeks earlier. "Miss Doolin," I said. My voice was very quiet. "Why did you wait 3 weeks?" She looked up at me. Her eyes did not waver. "Your mother told me to wait," she said. "She told me to wait until you had buried her. She said grief that has not been properly seated cannot hold a truth this heavy. She said, "You let my Ruth bury me first. You give her 2 Sundays after the burial. Then you go to her on the 3rd week, and you put it in her hands. She'll be ready then, not before." I felt my eyes fill up. I did not let them spill. I nodded once. "Will you come and sit?" I said. "Please." "I will sit on the step here, ma'am, if you don't mind. You sit too. I think this is a porch step kind of telling. Will you tell me something first, Miss Doolin? I will tell you anything I can. How was she at the end? I mean the last night. I was not there. I had gone home for 2 hours to feed the dog. I was not there when she went." Marguerite Doolin's gray-blue eyes did not waver. "She went easy, Ruth. She went without pain. She had her hand under her cheek, the way a child sleeps. The last thing she said to me, about an hour before, was, 'Marguerite, you tell my Ruth I am not afraid.' I said, 'I will tell her.' And she said, 'Tell her I have done my work.' And then she went to sleep. She said that. Done her work. Yes, ma'am. Those were her words. Thank you for telling me. You're welcome, ma'am." So we sat on the porch step, the 2nd step from the top, in the same place where I had sat on the night of the burial. She set the small, worn brown leather notebook in my lap. She went to her car, and she came back with a manila envelope sealed with brown packing tape. And she set the envelope down on the boards between us. The afternoon was beginning to turn gold over the ridge. If this story is finding you tonight, take a moment to press the like button below. It helps these quiet inheritance stories find the daughters who need them. I sat on the porch step with the notebook in my lap and the envelope on the boards beside me, and I did not open either one. Not yet. I could not yet. I sat with my right hand flat on the cover of the leather notebook, the way I had sat with my hand flat on the casket lid, and I watched the light go down behind the maples on the ridge until the long grass in the pasture had gone the color of brass, and then the color of pewter, and then the color of slate. And I sat there until the porch boards were cold under me, and the first stars had come up over the barn roof, and Marguerite Doolin sat beside me the whole time and did not speak. When the dark had finally come full down, she stood up and brushed her skirt with her hand. "I'll leave you to read them when you can, ma'am," she said. "There's a card in the envelope with my number on it. I'll come to the hearing. You have my word on that." "Miss Doolin," I said. "Why?" "Because she trusted me," she said, "and I have been her witness. That was the work." She walked down the porch steps, and she got in her car, and she drove away down the gravel drive, and her tail lights went around the bend by the cattle gate, and the night closed up after her, and I was alone on the porch with the notebook in my lap and the manila envelope on the boards. Before she left, while we were still sitting on the step in the gold light, I asked her one more thing. "Miss Doolin, the night she first asked you to write things down, what was that like?" She looked out at the pasture, and she did not speak for almost a full minute. The wind came up from the river. A barn swallow went over us in a low arc. It was September the 17th, she said. 2:14 in the morning. She had been sleeping. She woke up and she said my name, very quiet. I came over to the bed. She had her hand on the rail. She said, "Marguerite, are you a religious woman?" I said, "I am, Mrs. Whitcomb. I am a Methodist." She said, "Then I am going to ask you to do something for me as a Methodist, and not as a nurse. I need you to write something down for me that I cannot say in the daylight. I cannot say it where my doctor can hear me, because he will think I am out of my mind. I cannot say it where my pastor can hear me, because he will tell my sister out of kindness. I need you to write it down at night. I need you to bring witnesses I trust. Will you do this for me? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, did you bring a notebook in your purse tonight? I said, I always carry a notebook, Mrs. Whitcomb. She said, get it. So I went to the chair where I had set my purse, and I got my notebook. And I came back to the bed, and I sat down in the chair beside her, and she said, now, Marguerite, we will begin. And you began. We began. How many nights? 12, all told. And on those 12 nights, Marguerite, she dictated to you, in her own voice, word by word. Yes, ma'am. I wrote the way she spoke. I did not change a word. When she paused, I waited. When she said, cross that out, I crossed it out. When she said, put that back in, I put it back in. I read the page back to her at the end of every night. She approved every line. What was the first line of the will? She said, Marguerite, write this down. I, Eleonora Whitcomb, of Greenbrier County, West Virginia, of sound mind and reasonably failing body, do this 22nd day of September 2025, declare this to be my last will and testament. Then she said, read it back, please. I read it back. She said, now write the next part. She did the whole will that way, sentence by sentence, with the dates, with the bequests, with the exclusions. She did not need a lawyer in the room, Ruth. Your mother had been a schoolteacher for 41 years. She knew how to make a sentence sit still. What was the first line of the second letter? She said, write this down. To my sister Vivienne, whom I have loved my whole life, and who has taken from me with both hands. Then she stopped. She closed her eyes for almost a minute. Then she said, strike that, Marguerite. Start again. I struck it. She said, to my sister Vivienne, there is a list of moneys you have borrowed from me, and a list of things you have taken without asking. I am going to set them down here, because the time for kindness about them has gone past. I am setting them down because my daughter Ruth is going to need them when I am gone. Then she dictated the list. 23 loans, the bangle, a silver gravy boat from 1989, a box of letters between our parents from before the war. She remembered every one. I checked the dates against her account books on the desk, and every date she gave me matched the entry to the day. And the third letter. The third is private to you, Ruth. I will not say more about it than that. Thank you, Marguerite. You're welcome, ma'am. I sat with that for a moment. The light was beginning to change over the ridge. 3 letters. The first letter took 4 nights. The second took 5. The third took 3. After each letter, she rested 2 days. We finished on the 22nd of September. She signed each one in front of 2 of the night nurses. She had me file the originals at the hospital safe and bring her 3 carbon copies to keep under her pillow. The notebook I kept in my own purse the whole time. Why your purse, Miss Doolin? Because she asked me to keep it on my person, ma'am. Day and night, she said, you don't put that notebook down on a table where it can be looked at. You don't lock it in a drawer where someone with a key can find it. You keep it on you. When I am gone, you carry it to my Ruth on the 3rd week. That was her phrase, on the 3rd week, and you carried it on you. For 36 days, ma'am, the notebook never left my purse. I slept with my purse beside the bed. I could not speak for a moment. Thank you, Miss Doolin. Marguerite, please. Marguerite. Yes, Ruth. I took both inside. I lit the lamp on the kitchen table, and I sat down, and I did not open the envelope yet. I opened the notebook first, because the notebook was the rough draft. and I wanted to hear my mother's voice, the way she had spoken it before she had let it be set down clean. The first page was dated September the 18th. The handwriting was Marguerite Doolin's, round and neat and slightly slanted to the right, the handwriting of a woman who has filled in medical charts for 40 years. At the top of the page, she had written, "Dictated by Eleonora Whitcomb, 2:14 a.m. in her own words." And then the lines began, in my mother's voice, and I could hear her speaking them. I could hear the small rasp she got at the back of her throat when she was tired. I could hear the way she laid her sentences down, one after the other, like flat stones across a creek. I could hear her. I read for 2 hours. I read the rough drafts of all 3 letters in the notebook, and then I broke the brown packing tape on the manila envelope with a paring knife, and I took out the 3 sealed letters one at a time, and I read each one by lamplight at the kitchen table. The lamplight made a pool on the paper the size of a dinner plate. The rest of the kitchen was in soft shadow. Outside, an owl called twice. The first letter was the will. It was 4.5 pages long, and it had been signed by my mother on the 22nd of September in the presence of Marguerite Doolin and 2 registered nurses from the Greenbrier County Hospital, named in full at the bottom of the page, with their addresses and the last 4 of their social security numbers, the way my mother always did with anything important. The letter named me Ruth Eleonora Whitcomb, sole beneficiary of the farm, the savings at the Bank of Greenbrier, the proceeds of the 2017 timber lot sale held in trust at the same bank, and her personal effects, with 3 small specific bequests: her wedding ring to me, our grandmother's quilt to my cousin in Beckley, and her Bible to Pastor Renfro for the church library. It explicitly excluded her sister Vivian Halloway from any portion of the estate. The second letter was the disowning. It was 3 pages. It was written in my mother's plainest voice, the voice she used when she had run out of patience with a thing and was setting it down. It said that her sister Vivienne had borrowed money from her on 23 documented occasions over the 11 years between September the 2nd of 2014 and August the 11th of 2025. It said that not one of those loans had ever been repaid. It said that Vivian had taken our grandmother's gold bangle from the dresser drawer in the upstairs bedroom on the day of our mother's burial in 1996 without asking, and had been wearing it ever since. It said that Vivian had told 2 members of our family that she expected to inherit the farm, and that those members of our family had repeated this to my mother on the porch in the summer of 2024, and that my mother had said nothing at the time because she did not yet know how to put what she meant in writing. The letter ended with 1 sentence in my mother's most careful hand, a sentence I read 3 times before I let myself believe she had really written it. I have loved my sister all my life, and I have watched her take from me with both hands until there was nothing left for her to take but Ruth's home, and I will not let her have that. The third letter was for me. I will not write down here what was in the third letter. Some things are between a daughter and her mother and the lamplight at the kitchen table, and they are not meant to be read aloud on a porch step in a story. I will say only that when I had finished reading it, I folded it back along its careful crease, and I put it back in its envelope, and I laid my forehead down on the kitchen table on top of my crossed forearms, and I cried for the first time since the morning Mr. Caudle had called me at 6 minutes after 7. I cried until the kerosene in the lamp had burned half down. Then I sat up, and I wiped my face on the back of my sleeve, and I went into the parlor, and I took down the old shoebox of my mother's correspondence from the top of the bookshelf, the one I had already gone through twice, and I went through it again. And this time, in the very back of the box, behind the December 1973 letters from my father when he had been stationed at Fort Bragg, behind a place where the cardboard had been creased to make a kind of false bottom, I found the manila envelope of receipts. It was all there, 23 loans across 11 years, each one on a separate sheet, dated, amount written out twice, signed by Vivian in her own sharp hand. $2,000 on September the 2nd, 2014. $3,500 on November the 18th, 2014. $5,000 on April the 12th, 2015. $9,000 on July the 3rd, 2016, with a handwritten note in my mother's hand at the bottom. V says she will pay back by Christmas. She has not. $2,500 on January the 9th, 2017. The list ran on. The last loan was dated August the 11th, 2025, 3 weeks before my mother went into the hospital, in the amount of $1,200. The total at the bottom of the manila envelope, written in my mother's hand and circled twice in red pencil, was $87,450. I sat at the kitchen table with the manila envelope of receipts in front of me, and the 3 sealed letters from my mother on my left, and the small worn brown leather notebook on my right. And I felt for the first time since the morning of the call that the floor of my chest was no longer level water, but solid ground. I called Mr. Caudill at 11 minutes after 8 the next morning. "Mr. Caudill," I said, "I have everything." There was a pause on the line. "Bring it in, Ruth," he said. His voice had a tightness in it I had not heard before. "Bring all of it. We file Thursday." The probate hearing was set for the 3rd Wednesday in November in the Greenbrier County Courthouse, a small 2-story brick building of 1912 with a slate roof and a single courtroom on the 2nd floor. I drove down with Mr. Caudill at 7 that morning, and the dawn light was the color of pink chalk over the courthouse roof, and I had not slept well, and I had my mother's small silver locket warm against the hollow of my throat under the high-necked cream cotton blouse, buttoned all the way to the throat. I wore the same olive green canvas barn jacket I had worn to her burial. I wore the same scuffed brown leather lace-up ankle boots. I had pulled my gray-streaked auburn hair into a simple low ponytail at the nape, the way my mother had always worn hers when she was teaching her 6th grade class. Vivian came in at 6 minutes before 9 in the dark charcoal pantsuit and the cream silk blouse, with the small pearl pin at the collar and the polished black low-heel pumps. And she had on the gold bangle, our grandmother's, on her right wrist. She did not look at me. She looked at the bench. She had 2 lawyers from a firm in Charleston in dark suits with her, and she sat between them in the front row of the gallery with her sharp, upright back and her ash-blonde bob and her hard, pale blue eyes lined in dark eyeliner, and she rested her right hand on the rail in front of her so that the bangle caught the cool, fluorescent overhead light. Marguerite Doolin came in at 8 minutes before 9 in the same soft, pale gray wool cardigan and the cream cotton blouse with the small horn buttons buttoned to the throat and the knee-length charcoal pleated wool skirt and the plain brown leather low-heel shoes, and she had her silver gray hair in the same neat low practical chignon, and she had her silver wire rim glasses on the thin chain across her chest, and she was carrying a brown accordion folder under her left arm. She nodded to me as she came down the aisle. She sat in the 2nd row behind the bar. The judge was a woman of about 60, named Elsbeth Marrow, in plain black robes. She came in at 9. She sat. She read the docket aloud. She looked at Vivian's lawyers, and she said, "Counsel for the petitioner, please proceed." Vivian's older lawyer rose. He was about 50. He was in a navy blue suit with a red silk tie. He spoke for about 11 minutes. He said our mother had verbally promised the farm to Vivian in 1979 and had verbally confirmed it in 1994 and had repeatedly stated her intent over the past decade. He said 3 witnesses from Charleston were prepared to so testify. He said the absence of a written will meant the verbal record stood. He sat down. Mr. Caudle rose. He was 68. He was in a brown wool suit. He had a slight stoop. He was the kindest man my mother had ever known, and the most stubborn. "Your Honor," he said, "we have a written will. It is signed by Eleanora Whitcomb on the 22nd of September of this year. It is witnessed by 3 persons who are present in this courtroom today. It explicitly names Ruth Eleanora Whitcomb, sole beneficiary, and it explicitly excludes Vivian Halloway. We further have 2 additional letters from the deceased, also signed and witnessed, and we have 11 years of itemized loan documentation between the deceased and the petitioner. We would like to call our first witness." Vivian's older lawyer was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, we object to the introduction of the alleged will. The signature is not previously known to this court. We have no record of its preparation. It was produced by a hospice employee 3 weeks after the funeral, with no preceding notice to the family. We would like to challenge the authenticity of the witness signatures." Judge Merrow looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. She did not blink. "Counsel," she said, "you will have your opportunity to cross. Sit down." He sat. Marguerite Doolin was sworn in. She walked up to the witness stand without hurry. She set her brown accordion folder on the rail of the witness box. She put her right hand on the Bible and she swore the oath. She sat. She looked at the judge and not at Vivienne, and she folded her hands in her lap. Mr. Caudle walked her through it. He took her 36 minutes. He took her through her qualifications first. 39 years of nursing, 22 of those in hospice, board certified by the West Virginia Department of Health. 18 recommendation letters in her file at the Greenbrier County Hospital. No disciplinary actions on her record, ever. He took her through the night of September the 17th, the first night my mother had asked her, in a whispered request, at 2 in the morning, to write down something she could not say in the daylight. He took her through every page of the leather notebook, page by page, in order. He had her read aloud the dictation date and time at the top of each page. He had her identify the handwriting as her own. He had her read aloud the witness signatures at the bottom of each fair copy. He had her name the 2 registered nurses who had witnessed each signature. The 2 nurses were sitting in the 3rd row of the gallery in their hospital cardigans. He had them rise so the court could see them. They rose and they sat down again. Then Mr. Caudle said very quietly, "Miss Doolin, did Mrs. Whitcomb ever indicate to you in your 42 nights of caring for her why she had chosen to dictate these letters to you at this time?" "Yes, sir," said Marguerite Doolin. "She did. Will you tell the court in her words?" "Yes, sir. On the night of September the 17th, at 2:14 in the morning, Mrs. Whitcomb took my hand and laid it on her own chest, and she said, 'Marguerite, my sister has been taking from me for 11 years, and I have let her, because I am her older sister, and I loved her, and I let her too long. She is going to come for my Ruth's home when I am gone. I cannot stop her with my voice any more. I need you to stop her with my hand.' That was her phrase, sir. Stop her with my hand. Then she dictated the first letter. The courtroom was very quiet. "Thank you, Miss Doolin," said Mr. Caudle. "Your Honor, we now move to introduce as Exhibit B the itemized loan record between the deceased and the petitioner." Vivian's lawyer rose again, more slowly this time. "Your Honor, on what grounds?" "On the grounds, Your Honor," said Mr. Caudle, "that the petitioner's primary claim is verbal promise of inheritance, and that the loan record demonstrates the financial relationship between the parties was, in fact, in the opposite direction, and that the petitioner had been receiving from the deceased for 11 years and was not receiving promises but cash." Judge Marrow nodded. "Aloud, proceed." Mr. Caudle handed Marguerite Doolin the manila envelope of receipts. He had her open it. He had her read aloud, one by one, the date and amount of each of the 23 loans, and the place at the bottom of each sheet where Vivian Halloway had signed in her own sharp hand. Marguerite Doolin read for nearly 20 minutes in her steady, plain country voice. She read every date. She read every amount. She read every signature. She did not look up at Vivian once. When she came to the last loan, $1,200 on August the 11th, 2025, she read it the same way she had read the first one, and then she set the sheet down on top of the others, and she folded her hands again in her lap. The total at the bottom of the envelope, $87,450, she did not need to read aloud. Judge Marrow read it for herself. "Counsel for the petitioner," said the judge. "You may cross." Vivian's older lawyer stood up. He cleared his throat. He spoke for about 4 minutes, mostly in circles. He asked Marguerite Doolin whether she had been compensated for her time. She said no, that she had refused payment from the family, and that she would refuse payment from the court if it were offered. He asked her whether she had any personal grievance against the petitioner. She said she had never met the petitioner before today, and that she had no grievance of any kind, and that she had come because she had been asked to come by a dying woman who had also been a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse in Pocahontas County in 1972, when Marguerite Doolin herself had been 10 years old and had been one of her pupils for 2 years. I had not known that. The lawyer paused. He looked at his notes. He pressed on. "Miss Doolin, isn't it true that the deceased was on a substantial regimen of pain medication during the period in question?" "She was, sir." "Including morphine?" "Yes, sir." "How much morphine?" 2 milligrams every 4 hours, sir, by sublingual drop. Below the threshold of cognitive impairment. The dose is in the chart. Wouldn't you agree, Miss Doolin, that even a low dose of morphine can affect a patient's judgment, particularly at 2 in the morning? "I would not agree, sir." "You would not?" "No, sir. I have nursed 41 hospice patients on the same regimen, including my own husband in 2019. The ones who are clear remain clear. Mrs. Whitcomb was clear. She knew the date. She knew the names of every member of her family. She knew the price of a dozen eggs at the IGA in Lewisburg. She quoted a passage of Isaiah to me on the night of September the 19th, without missing a word. She was clear, sir." "You quoted Isaiah, Miss Doolin." "She quoted Isaiah, sir." "I wrote it down." "Where did you write it down?" "In the notebook, sir, on the bottom of the 3rd page of the rough draft of the 2nd letter. The court has a copy." The lawyer looked at his papers. He did not look at Vivienne. He cleared his throat. "No further questions, Your Honor." Vivienne did not testify. Her lawyers had told her not to. Judge Marrow recessed for 15 minutes. When she came back in, she was carrying the leather notebook in her own hands. She sat. She set it on the bench in front of her. She took off her reading glasses and she folded them, and she set them down on top of the notebook. The court finds the will dated September 22, 2025, properly executed, properly witnessed, and authentic, she said. The court further finds the petitioner's claim of verbal promise unsupported by documentary evidence and contradicted by 11 years of contrary financial conduct. The petition is dismissed. The estate of Eleanora Whitcomb is to be administered in accordance with the written will, with Ruth Eleanora Whitcomb as sole beneficiary. We are adjourned. The gavel came down once, plain, like a single nail being driven. I did not look at Vivian. I had decided at the kitchen table 3 weeks earlier that I would not look at her in the courtroom, and I did not. I gathered my things. I put my hand on Mr. Caudle's arm for 1 second to thank him. I walked out down the center aisle with my eyes on the door at the back, and the door swung open on its old hinges. And I walked through it and down the broad wooden staircase, and out into the lobby and out onto the courthouse steps. The sun had come up over the courthouse roof. The pink chalk of the dawn had gone. The morning was the bright cold blue of mid-November. Marguerite Doolin came out behind me. She had her brown accordion folder under her left arm. She paused at the top step, and she came down to where I was standing, and she set the folder on the stone railing, and she put her hands in the pockets of her pale gray wool cardigan. "Miss Doolin," I said, "I would like to give you something. I have been thinking on it. It would not be much. I would like you to take it as a kindness." "No, ma'am," she said. She shook her head once. "I will not take $1. Please." She turned to me and she took my right hand in both of her hands. Her hands were soft and warm and weathered. Her gray-blue eyes were steady. "Miss Whitcomb," she said, "I have been her witness. That was the work." I felt my eyes fill up for the second time in 3 weeks, and for the second time I did not let them spill, because she was looking at me, and because I had decided on the night of the burial that I would do this thing the way my mother would have done it, which was upright. "Miss Doolin," I said, "will you come to supper at the farmhouse a week from Friday?" "Yes, ma'am," she said, "I will." She let go of my hand. She picked up her brown accordion folder. She went down the courthouse steps to her car at her own pace, and she drove away down Main Street toward the road back to the hospital. And I stood on the courthouse steps in my faded olive green canvas barn jacket and my high-necked cream cotton blouse and my ankle-length dark blue jeans, cuffed at the boots, and my scuffed brown leather lace-up ankle boots, with my mother's small silver locket warm at my throat. And I watched her tail lights go around the corner by the bank, and I felt for the first time in 3 weeks that I was standing on solid ground. Mr. Caudle came out a moment later. He stood beside me. He did not say anything for a long time. "Ruth," he said finally, "Mr. Caudle, your mother would have stood on this step today the way you are standing on it. Thank you, Mr. Caudle." Vivian's older lawyer caught up to me at the bottom of the courthouse steps as I was walking to the truck. He was carrying his briefcase in his left hand. He stopped about 3 feet from me. "Mrs. Whitcomb, forgive me. I would like a moment of your time." "Miss Whitcomb." "I beg your pardon, Miss Whitcomb. What is it?" "My client has authorized me to convey her regrets. She would like to know whether you would consider a small gesture toward her, given the family connection. Some token of the estate, the bangle she is wearing." "The bangle she took from my grandmother's drawer in 1996. The bangle she has worn for 29 years. Counselor: "Yes, ma'am. Tell my aunt that the bangle is hers to keep. My mother said in her letter that it had been gone from her drawer for almost 3 decades, and she did not expect it to come home. Tell her she may keep it. Tell her not to write to me. Tell her not to drive up the valley. Tell her not to call this house. If she has anything to say to me, she may say it through Mr. Caudill, and Mr. Caudill will tell me whether to listen. Are you going to remember all of that? I am, Miss Whitcomb. Good day, sir. Good day, ma'am. I walked to the truck. I did not look back. I drove home up the valley. The November light was hard and bright across the long grass. The maples on the ridge had gone to bare branches. The cream clapboard farmhouse, with the dark green shutters, was waiting at the end of the gravel drive, the way a thing waits that has known you all your life. I parked at the bottom of the porch steps. I sat in the truck for a moment, with my hands on the wheel. I went inside. I made a pot of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and I drank it slowly, and I looked at the wall above the stove where my mother's small wooden cross hung. And I said to her, inside the back of my throat, where only she could hear me, the second sentence I had ever said to her there, "It is done, Mama. It is held." Then I went out onto the porch, and I sat on the second step from the top, and I watched the light move across the pasture, and I let the silence of the house settle down over me, the way a blanket settles, and I sat there until the sun had gone behind the ridge. Marguerite Doolin came to supper a week from Friday. I made my mother's chicken pie, the one with the buttermilk crust. I made the cornbread the way my mother had taught me, with bacon grease in the skillet. I made a green bean casserole. I made an apple pie from the Macintoshes off the tree by the spring house. Marguerite Doolin brought a small jar of her own elderflower jelly and a sprig of late goldenrod from her own garden in a piece of damp paper towel. And she stood at the kitchen door in the same pale gray wool cardigan and the same cream cotton blouse with the small horn buttons, and she said, "Miss Whitcomb, I have not been in a kitchen this clean in 20 years. And I said, "Please call me Ruth," and she said, "Then you call me Marguerite." We ate at the kitchen table where my mother had eaten 3 meals a day for 51 years. The lamp was lit. The window was full of the dark of the November valley. "Ruth, this crust is hers. Buttermilk and lard, the way she taught me. 2 cups of flour, ½ cup of buttermilk, 6 tablespoons of lard, 1 teaspoon of salt, no water." No water, that's right. She told me that in 1972. In the schoolhouse. In the schoolhouse. We had a baking lesson once, the older girls. She taught us biscuits. She said, "A girl who can make a biscuit can feed a family in lean weather." I have remembered that for 53 years. She said the same thing to me when I was 8. Of course she did. It was her sentence. Marguerite, will you tell me one thing she said in the schoolhouse that you have not forgotten? She set her fork down. She looked at me across the lamp. She said, "A child is not a vessel you fill. A child is a fire you tend." She said it on the second day of my second year with her. I did not understand it for 30 years. I understood it the day I delivered my first hospice patient to the morning shift in 1986. That sounds like her. It was her. Did she ever talk about me in those last 6 weeks? Every night, Ruth. Every single night. What did she say? She said you were the steadiest hand she had ever known. She said you walked the fence line every Saturday morning of every winter you were home, even in the snow. She said you set the porch swing chain in the barn yourself for 10 years before she could not climb the loft. She said you were her steady one, and that the world had not been entirely kind to her steady one, and that she was sorry for that. I could not speak for a moment. I put my hand over my mouth. "I did not know she said that, Marguerite." "She said it, Ruth. She said it almost every night. Did she ever talk about Vivienne?" "Once. on the night of the dictation of the second letter. She said, "I have loved my sister all my life. The trouble was, I loved her past, where the love stopped serving her." That was her sentence, past where it stopped serving her. That's a hard sentence. It's a true one, and she had earned it. We ate. The lamp burned steady. Marguerite Doolin said, "Ruth, your mother smelled of lavender every day of the 2 years she was my teacher, and every night of the 6 weeks she was my patient. And I thought about her hand cream the whole time I was writing those letters down for her in the notebook. I thought about her hand cream this morning, Marguerite, when I opened the kitchen curtain. It is still in the drawer of her teacher's desk. Don't you ever move it, Ruth. I will not move it, not while I am the daughter of this house." Good. We did not say anything else for a while. We just ate the chicken pie. After supper, she helped me clear the table, and we washed the dishes together, her in the soapy water and me drying with the cotton flour sack towel my mother had embroidered with violets in 1989. We put the dishes back in the cupboard. She put her wool cardigan on. I walked her to her car. "Marguerite," I said, "will you come back at Christmas?" "Yes, Ruth," she said. "I will." She drove away down the gravel drive. I stood on the porch, and I watched her taillights go around the bend by the cattle gate. The second time in 2 months I had stood on this porch and watched her taillights go around that bend, and I felt the night close up after her in the same way. And I went back inside, and I lit the lamp on the kitchen table, and I sat down with the small, worn brown leather notebook and the 3 sealed letters and the manila envelope of receipts, and I did not open any of them. I just sat with my hands folded in my lap, and I looked at them. Then I got up and I went to the parlor, and I took down the framed sepia 1968 wedding photograph of my mother and my father from the wall above the small walnut side table where it had hung for 57 years, and I dusted it carefully with the cotton flour sack towel, and I hung it back on the wall. I had decided what I was going to do with the leather notebook. I had decided on the courthouse steps. I just had not let myself say it yet. A year went by. I took the leather notebook to the small frame shop in Lewisburg in the 3rd week of January, and I had it framed in dark walnut behind museum glass with an acid-free linen mat, the cover out, the worn leather grain showing. I hung it on the wall in the front hallway of the farmhouse, beside the sepia 1968 wedding photograph of my mother and my father. The framing cost me $112. The man at the frame shop, who had known my mother for 20 years from the church choir, would not let me pay full price. He charged me the cost of the materials and his time at the rate his father had charged in 1985, and he told me to bring him a jar of my mother's tomato preserves from the cellar in the spring instead. And I did. The first time I walked past the framed notebook in the hallway, after I had hung it, I stopped, and I set my right hand flat on the dark walnut frame, the way I had set my hand on the casket lid at the cemetery, and the way I had set my hand on the cover of the notebook on the porch step, and I felt the wood under my palm, and I said inside the back of my throat, where only she could hear me, the 3rd sentence I had ever said to her there. She kept the truth in her pocket for 3 weeks, Mama, and she carried it up to the porch on a Tuesday afternoon, and she put it in my hands. Then I took my hand off the frame, and I walked on into the kitchen. I run the farm now. I lease the pasture to a neighbor who keeps Black Angus on it, and I keep a small flock of laying hens in my mother's old chicken house, and I keep her vegetable garden the way she kept it, in the same square-foot plan she had drawn in pencil on the inside of the cellar door in 1981. I sleep in her bedroom now, the front-facing one with the window over the porch roof. I make her chicken pie on the second Friday of every month. Marguerite Doolin comes for it. Marguerite came at Christmas, the first one, and she has come back every second Friday since. We eat at the kitchen table. We talk about the one-room schoolhouse. Sometimes about the lavender hand cream, and sometimes about the way the November light moves across the long grass on the ridge. We do not talk about Vivienne. Vivienne moved to Florida the spring after the hearing. I have not seen her since the courtroom. I do not know whether she has kept the gold bangle. I did not ask. If you have ever loved a parent the world tried to outmaneuver, subscribe to the sealed deed. We tell these stories because some witnesses keep the truth in their pockets until the daughter is ready to carry it. The leather notebook hangs in the hallway in its dark walnut frame, in the soft amber lamplight, beside my mother and my father in their sepia 1968 wedding photograph. And on the second Friday of every month, Marguerite Doolin and I walk past it together on our way to the kitchen, and we do not always stop, and we do not always speak of it. But once, on a Friday last May, Marguerite stopped in front of the frame, and she took her wire-rimmed glasses off, and she folded them down onto their thin chain across her chest. And she set her right hand on the dark walnut frame in the same place where I had set mine. And she said very quietly, "She is still teaching, Ruth. She is still teaching." And I said, "Yes, Marguerite, she is." And we walked on into the kitchen, and I put the kettle on, and the soft amber light in the hallway lay along the worn leather cover of the small notebook in its frame. And outside, the maples on the ridge were just beginning to come into their first green. And my mother's lavender hand cream was still in the drawer of her teacher's desk in the parlor where I had not moved it, and it would still be there at Christmas, and at Christmas after that, and at every Christmas as long as I am the daughter of this house.